Well, let's get the latest from the United Nations General Assembly now, and we're joined by our US Correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Thank you, Sherwin. So Ramaphosa has left. How has our President performed on the world stage this week?
Well, I hope he'll find some time to recline in that business class seat on South African Airways. The President, speaking to journalists here last night, talked about the fact that he'd given 10 speeches while in New York, and a lot of that focused on the land expropriation process unfolding in South Africa, very much focused on engagement with business leaders and potential investors, Francis. And then also, of course, in addition to that, the focus here at the United Nations as South Africa prepares to enter the UN Security Council on the 1st of January next year. To quote the President, this was a qualitatively so good process unfolding in New York in terms of his visit. Those were the words of the President, calling this a so good experience. In terms of the engagements, I think there's been a great deal of concern, I think a great deal of anxiety from potential investors, and what the South Africans sought to do over this week is to allay those fears. The President talking a lot about the land reform process in terms of how it will unfold, talking about it unfolding in terms of the rule of law within the Constitution, going as far as to say that there will be no land grabs in South Africa. And I think there's always this comparison that people have in the back of their minds, Francis, that this is a process that will unfold as it did with detrimental consequences in Zimbabwe.
Well, how well do you think he's done in trying to allay those fears? You tweeted a Wall Street Journal article. What's the commentary around South Africa at UNGA?
The sense is that they need to give this new administration the benefit of the doubt and take this president at his word. This is a process that is unfolding in a structured manner. I mean, there's a parliamentary process. The president talked about the public hearings and the 650,000 submissions that they've received and how they are methodically dealing with this. I think there was a meeting of minds here. And I think from the international perspective, yes, they do ask questions as it relates to that erroneous tweet that was tweeted by President Trump that really got, the cat amongst the pigeons, if you will, in the United States. But he's really sought to address that in a very systematic, open cards manner. And so you saw him engage with, a roundtable of CEOs yesterday. There was a business seminar where there was a back and forth, not just the president speaking, but questions from the floor about certain sectors. He talked about how they're recalibrating the mining charter and that this process is now going to really try to re-establish a solid foundation for South Africa. You heard that from SABC Jonas. You heard that from Nhlanhla Nene, the finance minister. That they're even talking about an investment book that they're working on and that they will be able to present to investors down the road. And of course, the big focus, throwing forward, Francis, will be the announcement, I'm told, by some new companies at that investment conference in October. I kept pushing some of the senior leadership of the delegation here to tell me who are some of the companies that will be announcing new investments. They said they want to leave it to those companies to make that known when they speak at the investment summit in October in South Africa.
All right, so you mentioned Donald Trump, and I think most of the focus, we have to agree, has been on him. And what a colourful press conference he gave.
Well, he certainly does suck the energy out of the room, doesn't he, Francis? Whether here at the United Nations, where I must say there were over 100 other world leaders, and we tend to focus only on the United States president from time to time. Some you say colourful, some have said outrageous, some have also said this was a me press conference. One of the headlines in The Atlantic, what just happened at the Trump press conference? I'm sure you can relate if people watch that press conference. The president also in that engagement with the journalists talking about that moment when he addressed the UN General Assembly here for the second time and talked about how in less than 2 years his administration had achieved more than almost every other U.S. administration in the history of the United States, of course eliciting laughter in the room. And as we've reported, it was, this wasn't laughing together, this was laughing at President Trump, because it was just such a ridiculous statement to make. And of course he came out fighting in this press conference, saying this was fake news. We are faking the news, Francis. This was a collegial moment. We were all laughing together. It was a moment that he had encouraged and had expected, and we all know that that is not the truth.
Yeah, you are not a profiteer of fake news, Sherwin. He also chaired a meeting at the UN Security Council, and now he's talking about China. So moving the focus from Russia interfering in elections to China.
Yes, and using a venue that was with an agenda that was about non-proliferation to talk about how China is now trying to interfere in the midterm elections because they do not want the Trump administration, and by virtue of that the Republican Party, to do well and to win in November, because they are mad at the Trump administration because he's the only president to have imposed tariffs on China due to unfair trade practices and a huge trade imbalance that the president has argued has legitimized his actions towards China. It was an inappropriate commentary to make in the venue that it had absolutely nothing to do with the discussion at hand. Security Council has rules and they have agenda items. So when you talk about the Middle East, you talk about countries in the Middle East. When you talk about non-proliferation, you talk about the DPRK, you can talk about Iran, you can even talk about South Africa and how they successfully denuclearized in the early 1990s. But you cannot go there and start pointing fingers at countries on domestic issues that have absolutely nothing to do with the subject matter. But the President of the United States is the President of the United States, and he listens to no one, no less this journalist in New York.
All right, thank you. Well, we appreciate your commentary. That was our US correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. And also the focus today, of course, will be on the Palestinians and the Israelis talking in the UN General Assembly. We'll bring you all the latest over to